Hello guys, welcome back to this YouTube channel. In this video, we're gonna learn how parameterization and expressions work in Azure Data Factory. This is one of the most powerful parts of ADF because it lets us build dynamic and reusable and metadata-driven pipelines. So without parameterization, every pipeline becomes rigid and hard to maintain. With with this feature, any pipeline can process hundreds of tables, files, or partitions. So to begin with, so let's see what is parameterization system. And just like you can parameterize at three levels. One is pipeline parameters, data set parameters, and link service parameters. Like this is basically instead of hard coding the file names, you provide it dynamically through values and references using rates, and I'll show you how it is done. So talking about, let's start with like pipeline parameters. So pipeline parameters allows us to control the behavior of a pipeline when it runs. Think of it like input variables or function arguments. Here in ADF Studio, I'll open in, go to pipeline tab, and uh, you can just go for a new one. And for example, you can just add whatever parameter you want over here. So these get their values when they actually start. So they can come from, for example, in this particular pipeline, we will be getting them for trigger, like triggers body pushes those whatever values we want, and you can see in here, like I'll show you in while we're discussing with other trigger parameters. So trigger pushes those values, and this is how pipeline captures them and use them. And so once a parameter is created, I can refer it anywhere in the pipeline using dynamic content. Like example, just like we used in our source when. So what we are doing is we are doing a event-driven pipeline where we are capturing the folder path where the data is dropped and the file name, the file which is dropped. So keeping in mind, so we are just providing to the source like the data source folder path and the file name, and that is as a source, and the source, the name of the file is again, like I said, this is how you define like file name, right? So this one, oops, it's already defined. Me. So yeah, so at the rate pipeline, for example, since this is a pipeline variable, it is defined as at the rate pipeline method and dot parameters and dot source file name, and meaning these are the parameters of the pipeline, and what are the parameters of source file name, which is defined right here. Sorry, yeah, this one. So similarly, in case you are doing giving a notebook, so even here you can just like I said, you can reuse them anywhere in the pipeline. So we also discussed about the dataset parameters here itself. So a dataset parameter normally points to a specific file or a specific table, or over here you can see it's actually points to a specific file or a variable. And you can just open this, and once you go to a parameter section, you can just see these are the variables you can provide. And so at the rate dataset, meaning this is a dataset parameter. So you can also give like data at the rate dataset dot. If you go back here, you can see, yeah, like at the rate dataset thing. So any dynamic variable, you dynamic parameter, you address that with at the rate symbol, and then you give your uh, function or the expression, whatever you want. So after now coming to the linked service parameters. So link service parameters allows us to change connection details dynamically. This is really useful in two situations when. So this is where you provide your parameters for the link service. So this will be useful in two situations. One is deploying the same ADF across the ADF code across dev, testing, and production. So connection to, and the second one is connection to multiple databases or servers using one link service, meaning you can use the same link service and it collects that particular data source. So you can just address this as like at the rate linked service, again in the method way, in a closed bracket, open and closed brackets, dot server name or a database name, whatever you define over here. So passing values across activities. So once you have parameters at multiple levels, the real world power comes from passing the values between them. So just like I said, the trigger, we have to make sure that we configure really well, because from here you can see, here you can see the trigger values. So for the pipeline parameters, this is source file path and source file name. The values are assigned via at the rate trigger body dot folder path and file name, because in the trigger notification you can find the folder path and folder name, because the trigger is defined around uh, begins with incidents, and you just gave a file path and the container name and the blob path ends with, and on creating it you will just get it. So meaning its work is to generate that file path and the file name to let us know when at that location the file is generated. So likewise, I said, let's see. So first, from trigger to pipeline parameters and pipeline to dataset parameters and pipeline parameters to link service parameters also works, and the activity outputs to variables and other activity inputs. So meaning, if you run this, if you check on monitor and look for last 7 days or 30 days, you should find some. Hmm, I don't know why it's not showing any of them. It should show one. But anyway, so the reason I'm showing this, if you run a pipeline and you can just get a, I want to show you like how you get the structure, but it's fine. So you can also shift by like transfer by like how the output of the one copy data, for example copy data, so it generates an output and like as as a JSON format, and based on that you can like give it to a input to another activity. You can also do that, like activity outputs to variables, and then another you can give them as another activity inputs. So now, so talking about the expression variables and functions, so um, as you can, if you can see, these are the uh, simple dynamically written uh, dynamically represented source file path and parameters, pipeline parameters, but you have a lot of system variables, functions, and variables over here. System variables means like pipeline name, data factory name, pipeline group ID, pipeline run ID, and all these the metadata of the pipeline and the since it is you're giving it as a pipeline, but if it is data set, you can also find something related to database. Sorry, data set. We'll also check that right real quick. Sorry, this one. Yeah, you can find the only functions for the data set. So what all we have, we can expand all of it. Contains an empty, first, insertion, join, last, length, returns the number of elements in an array or a string. For example, the following expression, like you can just the description is right over here. Like you can also find union, take, like conversion functions, string to array or base 64. You can also, for example, the variable is in a string and you want it as a integer, you can also do this. You can also get the UTC now, like the returns a timestamp as a string. So you have a lot of functions and you can which you can explore later. So in at the rate, like you can see an example over here. Let's say this pipeline load data returns us some kind of a folder name, and you want to call a CSV within that folder name. So you can also use a concat function, like concat function, by adding the container name and that file name and data.csv, that data name. Like this is just an example, like literal string parameter value in the function. You can use this concat and other dynamic content content to get define the parameters. Like you can see like string, date, and math functions. As you if you go back to pipeline parameters, and you can find we have our different functions. If we expand, all again is the same, and variables, you can define a new variable. So parameter and parameter and variables, they are completely different, meaning the variable is not consistent all throughout the pipeline. It may change at any time, and it is not consistent and it does not fix. Like for example, you can have an incremental variable, like the for each and every copy activity. For example, when you one on each and every activity it goes through the pipeline goes through, you can create a variable that increments to show how many number of something like that. But pipeline, once you define it, it doesn't change at all. It will be consistent throughout the entire pipeline. And now let's talk about pipeline and activity and item. Gives you information about the current pipeline run ID and parameters if you define any, and concat just like we did earlier. Use like at the like and the at the rate activity and activity name access outputs from the previous activity, and you can use this just like uh, we discussed over here. Activity outputs, this is how you can get the activity outputs dot output and output dot rows copied and the metadata of that particular activity, and the item used inside for each, and some other looping context. For example, for each stores the data in an array format. So at the rate items help us to fetch each and every item in a for each, like for each the rate item dot table name. Let's say you have a for each loop and you have a number of tables. To get an each table for each time, you use this particular somewhere something like this one at the rate item. This item at the rate item does is it just selects each element of a for each loop. If you run a for each loop on an array or something like the, you have to run a copy activity through a group of files. And you can also see like array and JSON conditionals, like you can create array and JSON some like if you want to have a JSON formatted output or something like that. And you can also use conditionals like if and equals and greater than or equals. Yeah, just like I'm talking about the metadata, you can easily build a metadata data driven pipelines. Like you don't have to worry about how to get the metadata, like the pipeline run ID and the all the other stuff, like how many number of rows executed and all. So you don't have to work and create more extra functions or extra code to gather that. So using this simple parameterize and using these metadata driven patterns by building this, you can just also get the metadata of, so it will be easy for you to perform your data pipelines efficiently. So metadata is something like which table to load, which folder to read, and which columns to select, and what SQL query to run. uh, and the pattern looks like something like use a lookup activity to read a configuration table, and for each loop over each row inside the loop, pipeline parameters and dataset parameters are filled using @, and copy activity loads each table or file dynamically. So it just stores result on a logging output, something like that. Example pipeline, like example pattern. So, and that completes this video, the parameterized and the parameterization and the expression system. This is one of the most important modules because it transforms your pipeline from static workflows into a fully dynamic metadata. And the best way to learn and master this is only by practicing. The more use cases we practice, the more we get our hands onto this. Yeah, that's it for this video. See you in the next one.